Bishop James Pike was one of the most controversial and paradoxical clergymen of our century. He was a lawyer turned priest, a Roman Catholic turned Episcopalian. He drew thousands into the church, yet was almost thrown out as a heretic. Some called him genius. When he went to mediums and seances, however, they called him mad. At last, he faced his destiny alone in the wilderness. His personal quest was for the answer to man's oldest mystery.
Hey, dickheads, like a pink laser beam of truth beaming straight from Ohio and California to your brain holes. We are your personal dickheads. We have channeled, we've started a seance and channeled our dead, suicided son's soul. That doesn't make any sense. Whatever.
It made sense. We channeled our suicided son's soul.
So trigger warning if you're offended by conversations about suicide. There's two of them involved in this book. So we are here today to talk about the Transmigration of Timothy Archer. We will get there in a little bit. This is the last book that Phil wrote in his lifetime. So it's a pretty big one. But we're going to start off like we always do with the PKD news.
Well, let's do some introductions first before we.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We should introduce ourselves. For the second time returning as an official co-host,
me,
Professor David Harlan Wilson. Welcome back. Tell the folks who you are and what you do.
My name's D. Harlan Wilson. I read, I write, I sleep, I do it all. I want to note, though, in the first podcast that I was on, Divine Invasion, on 2 occasions, I said the teleported man instead of the unteleported man.
All right.
I want to demonstrate that I'm aware of that. Thank
you. I think Larry did correct you one of the times.
He did, but then I said it again.
I just finished reading one of your books that is coming out next month. What book is that?
That is called Nietzsche, the Unmanned Autohagiography. And it's the 4th installment in my series of fake biographies. The other 3 are on Hitler, Freud, and Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, and I reviewed it on my blog by doing a fake biography of L. Ron Hubbard.
That's right. That's right. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I am David Agranoff. Don't know me. I'm the I've been here since the beginning. But I have a book coming out next month as well, and that is The Last Night to Kill Nazis. On that note, for the longest, most serious introduction of all, Mr. Langhorne J. Tweed, who are you and what do you do?
I'm Langhorne J. Tweed.
I like this new.
I do this.
Yes, I like your new backdrop. Is that
our poster?
Yeah. That's
the poster of our painting.
So where does that come from? Incidentally, who illustrated that?
Mike Dubish.
Mike Dubish.
Yeah,
great artist.
Specifically for the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's a Anthony
paid him.
Consigned it or whatever.
Yeah.
Requested.
Paid him money for it.
Real live money for it.
You know what? Is that the original?
This is not the original. This is the poster that you can get through Patreon.
I would love a link to that, if you please.
Yeah. Yes, that is beautiful. Yes, Mike Dubish, who did the Mystery Meat comic with Cody Goodfellow. Very good artist. He's done a lot of cover art too for various Bizarro and science fiction books. Great artist.
If you look
Mike
him up,
Dubish.
because right away on Google, you'll see a bunch of pieces by him that are pretty incredible.
Yeah, and he is an actual dickhead. Like, he likes Philip K. Dick. So he was
Say the name one more time, please.
Mike Dubish.
Got
it.
Dubish. Yeah. On that fun note, that's all of us. We are very excited to get to this episode, but first we need to do one piece of PKD news, which is show related somewhat too. The number 2 item, if you search Philip K. Dick news on Google right now, is friend of the podcast David Gill's Salon article on Chat GPT and how Phil predicted it in the penultimate truth and the big noodle in Divine Invasion. So we're super proud and happy for our pal David Gill for making the number 2 spot on the Google search for Philip K. Dick with this article. It's a really great article. Larry, have you read it?
I have not.
I knew you hadn't. So you should go read it.
I read it.
I'm going to have to find it anyway and put it in the show notes. So
right.
I will read it.
Yeah, no, it's a great article. And we're really stoked for Gil that he had that going on. Yeah, so we're ready to talk about the year 1982.
Wow. David, what was happening in 1982?
You know, it's funny you should ask because you've asked 47 times before about different years. But this year is one that you and I, all three of us, remember very well. But some of our listeners out there may not have even been born in 1982. So let's talk about what was going on when the transmigration of Timothy Archer was unleashed into the world. This is the same year that Ozzy accidentally ate a bat that he didn't think was real. This is when Michael Jackson's Thriller album came out. That's a big deal.
Who here had parachute pants?
Okay. Yeah.
Not me.
I didn't have parachute
pants. Who here was a break dancer in 1980?
I was not coordinated in that one. Yeah. I tried.
Bandana tied around my thigh. I had it all going on.
Yeah. The breakup of the AT&T monopoly was a big deal in 1982. That was a big. AT&T was told that they couldn't be all one company. Argentina invades the Falkland Islands was a big news story. The premiere of the first episode of Late Night with David Letterman happened that year, and of course, in the summer we had E.T., The Thing, and Blade Runner being released on the same day, which is crazy. And
I mean, this is widely considered the best year in science fiction. So
yeah, 87. Yeah,
science fiction effects.
But one terrible thing happened for science fiction in 1982, and of course, this is one of the biggest news events for this here podcast, which is that Phil died. And he died in March before this book came out. So he did not get to see the release of the Transmigration of Timothy Archer.
What did he die of? He died of a brain aneurysm or something?
He had a stroke, and he was in a hospital for a couple days and held on for a little bit. Do
we have any like Dutch Schultz sort of, deathbed confessions from him or anything?
No.
Was he lucid?
He was not.
Here, look, for YouTube viewers, there's a picture of him on his deathbed.
Yeah.
I'll explain what this is later.
He got a lot of visits. Doris came back. I believe Anne came to see him. So a couple of the wives.
It would be like a procession, I would think. Of just
a bunch of the writers came in, and there was a couple days between when the stroke happened and when he was pronounced dead. So there was it was all the daughters came, and I believe Laura was overseas, his daughter. I'd have to look back into that. That's in Ann Dick's book, but I think she was overseas studying and may have flown back.
And how old was he?
He was 53 when he died. So
right there in my future.
Yeah.
Well, he did. I think the drugs got him in the end, right?
Yeah, but I've done a lot of drugs.
You think you've done it? You think you've done as many as PKD? Really?
Yeah.
For that many years?
I spread it out more.
Oh, okay. Well, good.
So I'm probably fine.
Well, you recall the list of people who were killed by drugs that Phil put himself on that list while he was still alive. Yeah, I mean he knew he had done damage to himself.
Yeah, but he also didn't understand what the drugs were, so I'm not gonna hold that against him.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean this was a a big deal. The book, he died in March. The book came out in the summer, or released in April 82, so like literally a month after he died. So it's he knew that this was coming out. He was very proud of this book in many ways, and we'll get to that. Because this was the quickest completed to out non-science fiction book he had. Like this felt like literary mainstream success to him, which is funny because it was published by a science fiction publisher.
Oof,
and a science fiction.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and the same editor, David Hartwell, who did Divine Invasion.
What's funny was I was editing the last episode, and I'm also looking for this science fiction anthology that has a specific story about a rock creature that's young climbing out of the mountain that it lives in, and a hard sci-fi. And it was so many of those anthologies are Hartwell.
Yeah, no, he was a huge name in science fiction, huge, and he worked at Tor until he died, I believe, or retired.
Yeah, like
I know there's a big difference between death and retirement.
But anthologies, the science fiction anthologies, are from Hartwell. So
yeah, absolutely. He's a huge deal, and he did edit this book, and we'll all have some quotes from some of his friends as well as Phil when we get into it. But I think one of the things, I think this was a crowning achievement for him to have, and personally I think it's good that he knew that this book was going to be published before he died, because it was like a sense of accomplishment for him. Now let's so I suppose at this point we can get into the writing and publication history. This was written in April and May 1981, so it was written in 2 months, which is a pretty good clip for Phil. But we know that even later in his life, that when he got to writing, he just kind of knuckled down and like tried to do it as quickly as he could. This is the only Philip K. Dick novel in first person, which is interesting. It is
one.
Yeah.
Really?
Isn't it the only one also it's a woman too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Angel Archer is his only female protagonist, like main character. It's funny because I hung out with a whole crew of dickheads last night, and just last night we had a whole argument over who Phil based Angel Archer on, and we'll get to that in a little bit, because he, as Phil is wont to do, he had multiple answers, including saying there was no one that it was based off of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just have a goddamn character in a book, for Christ's sake.
But those of us who read his outlines know that he does often list three real life people that he bases his characters off of. And yes, there is no possible way, Larry, that we are going to talk about this book without me getting shocked for the autobiographical button 1,000 times, because this one is totally ripped from his life. It's not about him, but it's about people he knew and experiences he was around. So, yeah, I know, but that's just the way it is with this one.
Wait, which one was it?
Well, no, I'm saying Timothy Archer.
Come on.
Timothy Archer, the character, is obviously based on Bishop James A. Pike, who was a famous figure that Phil knew. And we will get into the details that, because if he were to even claim that this wasn't based on Pike's life, that so many of the facts are just like straight up out of his life. Now, there's contradictions on how his life.
But that's not my argument. You know that, right?
Yeah, I know.
My argument is that who fucking cares?
I know. That is your argument, but
Larry doesn't like you getting excited about autobiographical principles.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know that.
I'd rather you be excited about books. I mean, that's just my thing.
Well, yeah, but this is where the grump factor comes in. You just have to be extra grumpy about it, because you're just gonna have to fucking deal with it, because there is so much about.
I'm entertained by it.
Okay, well, that's good. All right, so Professor Wilson, do you have the notes up?
I do. You want to do the first quote from Norman Spinrad?
Yeah, tell us what Spinny said.
All right. Quote, Phil had come to know Pike and wanted to write a novel about Pike's spiritual odyssey. Somehow, perhaps because he felt he was irrevocably typed as an SF writer, Phil had gotten it into his head that the only way he could get such a novel published was to tart it up with a lot of thriller cum SF paraphernalia involving CIA plots, alien invasions, and the usual razzmatazz. Geez, Phil, I told him, you've got a great story here. You don't need all that crap. Why don't you just tell it straight? You think I could get it published, he asked. I told him I thought he could, and he decided to discuss the matter with Russell Galen, his agent and friend whom he really trusted. Galen encouraged Phil to go ahead, and the result was the Transmigration of Timothy Archer, which I believe is one of Phil's 3 or 4 best novels, and a return to the level of The Man in the High Castle, The Three Stigmata of Bulmer Eldritch and Ubik, after too many years of floundering around with lesser works. Certainly, it's far superior to Valis or The Divine Invasion, utterly coherent, totally controlled, spiritually lucid, and filled with loving clarity.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I think Spinny, as Phil called him, it's interesting that he says that he's returning to the level of those books. So he's clearly throwing shade on Valis and Divine Invasion, right? And
definitely among the science fiction authors who tend to be more conservative in their purview of how books should look.
Yeah. It's interesting because, what's Spinrad's saying here too is that I like what he said, that you don't need all that razzmatazz. It's interesting to think about how there's another version of this novel that had alien invasion and had all the razzmatazz. And then my question is, do you guys think that would be a better or more interesting novel than this one?
I mean, not for me. I mean, yeah. This novel hits my wheelhouse. So,
yeah.
Other than the last 30 pages, which is trash. But
so, is this among Larry? Is this among one of your favorites?
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. All right. Well, spoiler alert for the when we talk about our final thoughts. But yeah, it's interesting because I think if he had done all the razzmatazz, as Spinrad put it, I think it wouldn't have been so different of a novel. I think one of the things that makes it like a stronger novel is that it's not like the rest of his oeuvre,
It's told straight. Yeah.
It's told straight, yeah. And that's one of the things that I think makes it a little different. It's let's talk about him saying that it's utterly coherent, totally controlled, spiritually lucid, and filled with loving clarity. I don't know. I think you
take out those last 35 pages and yes.
So what I would say is utterly more coherent than most of his work, more totally controlled than most of his work. Spiritually lucid, I could go with that with other ones, and I would say there's loving clarity compared to some. But I wouldn't say that it's completely all those things. I just think comparatively, right? Yeah, which is fine.
Yeah, probably.
This is my first. By the way, this is my first time reading Timothy Archer. I had not read this.
This is my second time reading.
Okay. This is.
But that's it. I haven't read anything else.
Yeah.
Wait a sec, David. You've never read this novel before?
Never read this one before. Reading it for the podcast.
Oh,
but
okay.
you read it before. This is your second time, right?
It is. Yeah, years ago I read it.
Yeah.
When did you read it? Because I read it in '93 or something.
Yeah, mine was mid to late 90s. Yep.
Yeah. Now, did it feel like a totally different experience to you reading it now?
It did. I was kind of bored. But I grappled onto these words like utterly coherent and totally controlled. I was bored because what I like in, as we've talked about, in Dick's work is the opposite of that. I like the incoherence. I like the lack of control.
Yeah, the frenetic sort of
yeah,
pieces coming in from everywhere and a jumble.
Yeah. Yep.
Phil turned down a lot of money in order to write this book because he was offered a gig to write a novelization of Blade Runner.
But we've talked about that.
Yeah, we've talked
Watch
about
our
that
Blade Runner / Do Androids episode.
Yeah, I'm not going to go deeply into that. Just the idea that
that's mentioned in the next quote.
Yeah. So why don't you read that quote then?
You bet. Quote, and this is from Phil. Now the payment on that novel is very small. It's only $7,500, which is just about minimum these days. It's because in the mainstream field, I am essentially a novice writer. I'm not known, and I'm being paid on the scale that a new writer coming into the field would be paid on. The contract is a 2-book contract, and there's a science fiction novel in it. And it pays exactly 3 times for the science fiction what is being paid for Timothy Archer. Simon & Schuster wanted Archer first, and I wanted to do it first. Of course, I may find that I made a very great error because it may not turn out to be a successful book. It may be that I've lost the ability to write a literary novel, if indeed I ever had the ability to do so. It's been over 20 years since I've written a non-science fiction novel, and it's very problematical when I can write mainstream literary quality type fiction. This is definitely an unproven thing, an X factor. I may find that I've turned down $400,000 and wound up with nothing. What the hell happened there? Give me a break. He didn't turn down 400 grand for 7,500. I don't give a shit what was going on.
There's some vast amount of money that he did.
Yeah, there's a vast amount of money he was offered for the Blade Runner thing, but he honestly, he thought it was impossible for him to write that. He thought there was no way he could sit down and write that and turn in something good. And he was I think he was afraid to try.
Would he have been paid regardless?
Well, he got paid for so that's why he fought so hard to get the edition that had the Blade Runner poster on it of Do Androids Dream, because he, in his heart of hearts, he didn't believe he had it in him to write
the novelization.
Yeah. Because he thought he just if you look at Divine Invasion, he's probably not wrong, because Divine Invasion might as well have been a 60s science fiction novel, right? And they wanted a modern, hey,
like a William Gibson book or something like that. No,
yeah.
You're not going to get that from PKD.
And there was talk that they went to Russ Galen and said, well, we can hire a hotshot young science fiction writer, or even one of your friends, Phil, and they can do the novelization. And, he didn't want that because he wanted it to affect his sales. So he made the right choice for him to make sure that Do Androids Dream was the one with the Blade Runner cover. But he got paid significantly less because it was a reprint and not a new novel. So
I'm still suspicious of that, because his whole life struggled with money, right? I mean, was he that protective of his legacy? Maybe I don't know.
Well, here's the thing.
Good argument.
Keep in mind that in those couple years before that is when he first started to feel financial freedom. He was starting to have enough, because he was doing things like buying Laura a car. He was he had money, and so he had enough to live.
What does that mean, though? When like, for instance, J.G. Ballard, when he died, he had $10 million in the bank. What's money to Philip K. Dick? It ain't $10 million, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
I have no idea what he considered like, well off or decently taken care of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a good question. Also,
not sure. But yeah, we went into that a lot on the episode about Blade Runner. The movie episode, not the
book episode,
not the Do Androids Dream episode. Yeah. All right. So PKD said
Timothy Archer is essentially the third novel in a trilogy of which Valis is the first and The Divine Invasion is the second, which is sort of interesting because each book is unique. It really was necessary for me to do the novel as a projection of thematic material going back years and years and years in my writing, and stuff even as early as Eye in the Sky and Time Out of Joint. Those themes are constant preoccupations with me. They unfold by their own inner organic drive, and I don't really have the option of aborting that process and just suddenly going into a completely commercialized thing aimed at 12-year-olds.
So, David, this brings up a question. And now you're still of the opinion that this is not a trilogy.
Oh, me? Not a real trilogy. It's a marketing trilogy. So I don't know.
That was a PKD quote saying it's a trilogy.
I know, but I think it's a marketing quote. If anything, Radio Free Albemuth is more of part of Valis than this is.
We'll find that out. I haven't read it yet, so I can't make a judgment on that. But that was thematically the religious drive in each of these books does make them a trilogy.
Sure. It's a loose trilogy. I don't know that. I think that all three books kind of stand on their own to a certain degree. I think Divine Invasion benefits.
God, any trilogy should be like that. We should hope.
Well, I think Divine Invasion can live without Valis, but is better if you've read Valis. Whereas I don't think you need to read either of the other two to enjoy Transmigration of Timothy Archer.
I don't think you have to even read any other PKD novel to enjoy Transmigration. So,
yeah. And as a matter of fact, I'm sure there are people who are really interested in Bishop Pike and maybe read on Wikipedia that Phil based this on his life. And if you're interested in Bishop Pike, you could come to this and just read it for that reason.
That's why I'm sort of looking at this as we are now looking at a new crowd coming into this novel because this novel is so different from his other stuff. And I know we'll talk about it in the future, but it's just that this is not going to be your general sci-fi crowd. This is going to be your, I guess, more literary sort of crowd looking at this.
Go ahead.
One thing I thought when I was reading it, and we can get back to this later, is I'm very curious as to what, not that it's not a competent and capable book. There are lots of great things going on in there, but I'm interested in what specifically you like, because I wonder if it would have had the success or whatever we want to call it, the aura that it has, if it was, say, Philip K. Dick's first book, or if it wasn't connected to his oeuvre. In and of itself, I find it difficult to remove that Phil Dickian mystique from any of his work. So when I'm reading it, I found myself thinking, gee, I enjoy this to some degree because it's written by Philip K. Dick. I don't know if I would if it wasn't. Now, I can't disentangle myself.
Whereas I'm the exact opposite. I had those same thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
When I removed PKD from the equation, I enjoyed it even more.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're on the opposite ends. That's
yeah.
I'm with Big D here because I don't think I would have probably enjoyed this if I didn't.
No, you would have hated this. Like, I don't know if you liked it or not, but you would have absolutely hated this if it didn't have that PKD connection.
You're probably right. I don't know if I would have hated it, but I probably.
Oh no, you would have despised this.
I wouldn't have finished it probably.
No, you wouldn't have.
But the fact that it is autobiographical, and because it's a guy whose life and work we study, it does, create all kinds of fascinating aspects for me. But, without that, but at the same time, that's a part of it. You can't divorce that from this book. And So we can hypothetically look at it and say, like, I wonder if I would have liked, well, but that's what this book is. It's like, I don't know. It's like saying, like, I don't know if I'd like Star Wars if the Force wasn't involved, right? You know,
No,
like,
it's not like that at all.
that's
Not your best, comparison, but
okay. I don't
gotta
know
be a
if
better one.
Star Trek without space. I don't know, but
It
whatever.
took place in an office building.
So we talked about the fact that it's first person and it's Angel Archer, and this is really funny because we had this argument last night when a bunch of us dickheads were hanging out because I think it was Keith Giles, who's coming up on the show here soon, probably already out before you listen to this one, so you can go back and hear that interview.
Yeah.
But Keith was saying, like, oh, well, he based Angel Archer partially off Ursula Le Guin. No, that is not the case. The inspiration from Le Guin was to do a female character because she called him out for not having female characters. It's not that he based the character off Ursula Le Guin. Let's be clear. It's that she said you do not have enough female characters. You do not represent women at all. You don't know how to write women.
Misogynist. It's obvious.
Right. And so he was challenged by Le Guin. Like that was one of it. He wanted to, and he was so proud of himself that there's one point where he wrote a letter to her saying, like, and I don't know what he was thinking, but he was basically like, you're going to love this novel because there's a woman at the center of it. And I don't know if she liked Transmigration or not. I don't think she's ever commented on it. But
that's interesting.
Yeah. And we have a quote about
because they are women, but they're not. I mean, there's a woman at the center, but she's not exactly the womanist woman on the planet.
No, and I heard Phil's voice. I mean, Jesus, she works in the record store.
I mean, that's fair.
Right? Yeah. You want that Le Guin quote?
Yeah.
This is Phil talking to Le Guin, I believe.
In a letter.
In a letter, okay. This is the happiest moment of my life, Ursula, to meet face to face this bright, scrappy, witty, educated, tender woman. What's he trying to do there? Had it not been for your analysis of my writing, I probably never would have discovered her. Now, I paused there because it sounds like Phil's hitting on her, as he tends to do. Is he referring to Le Guin there?
Yeah.
Does he have any female relationships that aren't based on some kind of sexual attraction?
I don't think so.
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, one of the ones that was very important, that was not a sexual thing, was his daughter Laura, who.
Well, Jesus.
Well, yes, that's what I'm saying.
Was that another segue?
That was the worst segue ever. So Anne Dick, his wife, the mother of Laura, suggested that many times that Phil said to her in private conversation that Laura was the inspiration for Angel Archer. However, we are going based on her saying that, where at the same time, Phil has many times said that Angel was just a creation. And
you can see Phil saying that, right? Like,
yeah, you could see him saying that to Anne, but at the same time,
Anne in some way, maybe like, no, this is about our daughter, so it's cool. Or something like he would have.
And then at the same time, in the final interview that he gave, and that's published in this book, "What If Our World Is Their Heaven?" and I'll have quotes from that. He talks a lot about Timothy Archer in this because that was the just completed book. And in this one, he very specifically says there is no one woman who inspired Angel Archer. But he also talks about how much he missed her when he finished writing the book. And he talked about her like, he specifically talked about how she was smarter than him and that, he missed being around her when he was writing the book. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Which is, it's a thing.
I'm sure we've all done that with characters.
Right.
Oh, yeah. All right, so here are the theme. You know what time it is.
What?
Bathroom?
We're done with the writing
theme?
public. Yeah. It's time for the.
I do.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I almost don't want to. I almost don't want to know how you're going to break this down.
Pretty sure this is the easiest one that we've ever had.
All right. Story breakdown.
Yeah.
Mr. Tweeter.
All right. Let's start
Tweet
this
it.
story. What?
Get tweeting.
So let's start this story where it should start, where every story should start, in Sausalito, my favorite place where I hope to retire someday if I ever get to retire for reals. And let's see, Sausalito, where our protagonist, one Angel Archer, is attending a seminar by a guru by the name of, is he in there? Edgar Barefoot, who's a big fat guy.
Based on Alan Watts, I'm told.
Huh. So this Alan Watts stand-in named Edgar Barefoot. And she seems to be a sad person because all the people in her life have died in one way or another. We go back in time to her and her husband meeting their dad, or her father-in-law, his dad, at a restaurant where her friend is trying to convince him to do a speech for a feminist group. He gladly agrees. Then he ends up banging that woman. So that's how that started. So he bangs the woman. Then they're like, oh my God, we're friends. And everybody's getting along. And look, isn't this great that you get to bang? And no, it's not great, because apparently Angel doesn't like that shit. She is against it in a big way. If you had liked Angel up to this point, you're not going to like her anymore, because she has a total freak out where she basically calls everyone in the world stupid other than her, and says, if I stoke a little weed, maybe I can tolerate all of you fucking losers. So yeah, she's great. It's just great. It's just a great scene. She berates her husband, hoping that he'll punch her in the throat or something, and he's not buying into it. But he has some weird stuff to say about jealousy. Anyway, so we get past that. We're back onto the straight and narrow, where Timothy Archer, who is the father in more ways than one, Jeff, who is his son. It's Kirsten, right? Kirsten.
Yes, Kirsten.
Sorry, it says Kristen here on the thing, so I got confused for a second. Kirsten, who is the feminist woman who is now the lover mistress of Bishop Timothy Archer. Those are our main characters in the whole thing. There's also another guy, Bill, who factors in quite a bit, but we'll get to that. We got a little bit of talking to do about Bill. So where were we? Oh yeah. So she goes to Archer's office in the Archdiocese Church Cathedral of Heaven, whatever it is, in San Francisco, and says, you got to stop banging my friend because it's bad for you. And he says basically, no, I'm going to keep doing that because I'm a human and I need to bang. And so, yeah, well, you are a human and you need to bang, and she should know that, but that's beside the point. And then her husband gets the hots for the mistress woman, and shit gets really weird for a while. But then they have to go to England because there's these scrolls or something or other, some writings that are being translated that prove that Jesus was just this dude that wasn't really the Son of God, but he was carrying the message of God, which was basically do mushrooms. That was what God said we should do, is just do some mushrooms and be happy. So the Eucharist, which I was denied once, which was awesome. uh, Denied in a very, very personal sense, where the priest went, nope, and then moved on to the next person. It was at a wedding. I think he was told to not get anywhere near me. He might burn. So anyway, so
interesting factoid.
Interesting factoid there.
What's the name? What's the name of the mushroom? Is it Anoki?
Anoki?
Is that how you pronounce it?
That's how I'm pronouncing it.
Yeah, okay. I'll go with that.
I mean, Anoki would be also a good pronunciation, I think. But so in England, Jeff comes to visit, and there's something that happens we're not told, but I think Jeff confessed his love for Kirsten, and she basically said, yeah, get away from me, boy. Because, I mean, she's not quite a human being. She's sort of a demon unto herself, a very bipolar demon at that. But we're told that that's because she does a lot of drugs. So, barbiturates, to be exact. And that it's not truly her fault that she's this laugh, cry, yell monster. So Jeff comes back home, leaves his wife, who is our protagonist, and goes and lives in a hotel until he shoots himself in the head. Boom, first death. All right, so at that point, Archer, there's so many Archers. Timothy Archer and Kirsten believe that Jeff comes back, and he's then a ghost that's haunting them, and that now they've gotten through their guilt because of his ghost being there. This is, of course, dumb, but Angel, who is always the person with the sarcasm and the pithy statements, decides to go along with it because she has to admit to herself that being the friend of a famous person is more important than honesty to her. And what a great lesson that is. One we've seen play out so many times in the public sphere is just famous people getting away with stupid stuff, or not getting away with stupid stuff because no one was there to say, hey, you're being an asshole. We're told the reason why is because you don't want to lose that connection to that fame. Anyway, so that happens. Then he decides to write a book about his son coming back, which is probably the dumbest thing a bishop could do, is write about the supernatural. So he knows he's being stupid. So they go down to Santa Barbara. They meet with a psychic who tells them that Timothy is going to die. Kirsten's going to die. Angel, you're all right. So great. So Kirsten does die. She ODs. So basically another suicide. Archer leaves the diocese, goes and becomes a consultant for a think tank. But and I wish I could remember the terminology that Dick used for the sort of like the thought that becomes all encompassing. I can't remember the name of that, but the thought that becomes
I don't remember either.
And consumes a person and makes that brain die, which is a super fantastic sort of metaphor for having that thought that can't leave your head. But he is all consumed by this connection between the Anoki and the Eucharist and Jesus Christ, and how this is this is the answer to all of his life's problems, is to find this mushroom. And if he consumes that mushroom, then he will truly understand God and find peace within himself. So he decides to go to Israel. There's other stuff that happens, but it's not important. It's not important. It's basically thinking about stuff and talking about stuff and our feelings and this and that. So then he's like, I got to go to Israel. You come with me, not as my lover because that's grody, but as my secretary because I need that secretary. And she says no because, and man, this is another moment of pure life getting in the way of beautiful story. But she says no because I'm afraid because then I'd have to give up all the security I have in my current life. And so she decides not to go to Israel with him. He goes to Israel by himself, dies, and then the book ends. What a great book it was. That was amazing. Just incredible. She ends with like, am I a robot? Am I a person? Is this all there is to life, is just functioning now that all this excitement in my life is gone because it's all dead? Oh, what a relief. Then he goes on to talk about some weird shit about fucking Timothy Archer coming back in the head of the crazy kid that she thought she said she would never see again on page 100 or 103 of my edition. She said, I never saw Bill again. And that was the end of that character until she saw him again on page 118, and then again, and then again, and then again. And so we get this whole coda thing where it's like, oh, Timothy Archer is back inside the head of the hebephrenic, and he's alive again, but he's not alive again. It's just another part of his psychosis. And then this great doctor, I wrote his name down specifically because he is my favorite character in the whole book. Dr. Greeby in the Mental Institute says everything I wanted to say to Angel the whole book, that you are just a Berkeley intellectual. I've seen a million of you. You're a nothing person. You need to leave this kid alone because you're trash. Get out. Which was amazing. And that's the only part of the coda that I actually enjoyed.
We're gonna end up arguing about the coda a lot.
Then she's like, oh yeah, I'll show you. I'll ruin that kid's life despite what you say. And then it basically, that's about the end.
Oh, well, there we go. The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. Okay, so for folks playing along at home, these are the themes as I broke them down. Characters.
That's a theme?
Yeah. Real life events. Hearsay and religion.
Hearsay or heresy?
Heresy.
Heresy, okay.
Heresy. What?
Always hearsay.
All hearsay.
Always.
Heresy and religion. Random shit I liked.
I like random shit I liked. That's my favorite theme of anything.
Yeah. So let's start with the character, because that's everything. So we already talked about Angel a little bit, so I'm just going to move on to...
Hey, let me say one thing about Angel, if that's okay.
Yeah, go.
You mentioned how, because this is a literary mainstream novel that Phil was dying to write. Presumably, I think at some point I read he said he hadn't written or aspired to write a mainstream book or story for like 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, all kinds of science fictional things work its way into the narrative. And you mentioned how later in the book, when Angel is, I forgot what the context is, but she equates herself with, Dick's beloved androids, essentially. It's on page, real quick, on page...
It's actually what I called the end of the book. It's page 214.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, it's on 213 and 214.
214.
And she uses the word machine, like 10 or 20 times in reference to herself in one paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was a beautiful passage.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite in the book for sure.
Yeah.
So my point is there's always sort of one thing, of course, distinguishes something as science fiction is technology, right? And in that passage, she sort of technologizes herself and equates it with death. Like she's dead inside because she's
truly dead.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm fine with if you want to read the passage too, or if you think
if you want to read that whole thing, I'm down.
All right, here it goes.
And I do have a quote about Laura when you're done.
Okay. The soul I lost during that week did not ever return. I am a machine now. Years later, a machine heard the news of John Lennon's death, and a machine grieved and pondered and drove to Sausalito to sit in on Edgar Barefoot's seminar because that is what a machine does. That is a machine's way of greeting the horrible. A machine doesn't know any better, simply grinds along and maybe whirs. That is all it can do. You cannot expect more than that from a machine, etc., etc. That repetition is actually a literary technique. Poe used it all the time.
I use it all the time in my writing too.
And I mean, look at Dick here. In the end, he finally did what he wanted to do. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that is a great passage, and it really kind of speaks to like Angel kind of self-reflecting in a way that kind of meets up with that whole idea that she's being told you're just a Berkeley intellectual. She's like kind of self-disparaging herself there, which is interesting. So I'm going to read some quotes from the final interview, and this is "What if our world is their heaven?" Final Conversations of Philip K. Dick, and that title is a reference to the book that he would have written next, The Owl in the Daylight. Yeah, so this is from the final interview that Phil gave a couple months before he died, and they're talking about Angel Archer as a character and the novel.
Okay.
Timothy Archer.
Dick says, yeah, it is. It starts out this way. Quote, Barefoot conducts his seminars on his houseboat in Sausalito. It costs $100 to find out why we are on this earth. You also get a sandwich, but I wasn't hungry that day. John Lennon had just been killed, and I think I know why we are on this earth. It's to find out that what you love the most will be taken away from you, probably due to an error in high places rather than by design, unquote. Okay, now this is a woman. She's in her 20s. I'm a man and I'm in my 50s. Okay. She's graduated from the University of California. I did not. I went a month and was thrown out. She may even have a master's degree. It's a little vague, but she, evidently, was a very good student in the English department. I was never in the English department. I majored in philosophy. She's okay now. Here's the strange part. Now, this is impossible. Now, this cannot be. She's smarter than I am. Now, the whole book is through her viewpoint. This is not just a character. The whole, every single thing that happens is seen through her viewpoint. She's smarter than I am. She's more rational than I am. She's more educated than I am. And she has a broader vocabulary than I have. And she's acquainted with source material, books that she's read that I have not read. And yet everything is through her viewpoint. Sounds like he's really, what a disclaimer that is. It sounds like he really wants it to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely wants that to be true.
Right.
He wants her to be smarter. But I thought that was a really fascinating thing that he just, it was really important to him, this idea that, because he never wrote a first-person novel before, and of course never did again, this is the only time that he's done that. And it was really important for him to suggest this idea that Angel was smarter than him. It's really interesting. I like how much thought he put into she's probably in the English department, maybe, but he is thinking about it, and I found that interesting. So before we move on to the Bishop, is there anything else you guys want to say about Angel specifically?
Besides her being a bad person?
Well, you find her very judgmental. That's your issue.
Well, I think she's exactly like me.
Oh,
I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
No.
And so she's exactly like me.
Are you trying to tell me she's a good person?
Well, I'm saying I think Phil thought she was a good person. Phil thought she was great.
But what do you think?
I was kind of indifferent. I just thought she was such a Phil cipher. I think he thought she was so different from him, but she really wasn't. I
Wow,
mean,
David, you don't have an opinion of the character just in context of PKD.
okay. Wilson's laughing because he knows how hard this is for him.
Well, no, for me, she seems more like a vehicle for Phil to do whatever he wants. I mean, Phil is just kind of using her, that's Phil for me anyway. I hear and see Phil more than her.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But that in the context of the novel, she's not Phil.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true.
And you're right. Like when she's talking to that doctor that you mentioned, she's a prick. She's being a prick on purpose to that doctor. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She needs to establish every conversation she has. She needs to establish that she is superior to everyone else in the room. Yeah. That is her entire character.
And I believe
when she talks about her husband's suicide, she accepts no culpability in his death. She's not even part of his death, according to her. It just happened away from her. There's no part of her in any part of this story. That's what
should be noted that the
villain. She is the villain of the story, and she is the protagonist of the story.
And you think Dick was trying to create it didn't work, but do you think he was trying to be objective with Angel?
Well, it should be noted that James Pike Jr., the one that committed suicide that this was based off of, I don't believe he had a wife. So this character, I know you don't give a shit if it's like.
What does this have to do with the book?
Because it's his inspiration. He's telling the story based on these events that happen. So you can't divorce it. You have to look at.
Yes, you can divorce it. The book is one thing. Real life is another thing.
Oh, come on! But with Philip K. Dick, no, he was telling the story as he remembered it, and that's the thing. That's why you can't.
Not real life. A novel is not real life.
I know this. You know this. I'm saying that Phil had a hard time separating these things.
This is insanity.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it came down to what Spinney said with we're not gonna add the razzmatazz, and I think he went as far as to change very little about the events that happened in Pike's life. And the other thing,
what is the exploration there? What is the exploration of why he made the protagonist Jeff or whatever his name was in real life? What was the impetus to make that relationship happen?
What relationship between who?
Between Jeff or James and this imaginary character.
An angel? Why would he add the? That's I think to have another character in there that wouldn't be so obviously Phil.
Now, in a way, what you say is correct, because she wouldn't have culpability in her husband's death if she didn't exist, right?
Well, and here's the other thing.
There would be no blame cast to her, because she's not a real person.
I think the other thing that Phil was doing is that one of the things that bothered Phil about Bishop Pike was the fact that Pike never took any responsibility for the 2 suicides of the people around him. And the fact that he, even to the point where we'll get more. Let's get into Bishop Pike for a second.
No. Wait. We were talking about something. We're in a discussion.
I think there's context here, though, because
okay, all right.
So one of the contexts here is that Phil's particular relationship with Pike and how it started relates to one of the things that I think Phil had a little bit of guilt on. And I think in this situation, and I think it bothered him that Pike, who he respected a lot, did not feel any guilt or shame on, which is his mother-in-law, Marin Hackett, having had an affair with Pike. And the person who introduced them was Phil. So what happened was Marin wanted to have, she was involved in a similar church or a church under his auspice as the bishop. And she wanted to have him come to some fundraiser or something. And Phil
So
wrote,
basically what happened in the book.
yeah. And Phil wrote the letter that introduced them. And then Marin eventually became Pike's mistress. And they had a secret apartment in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. And this is one of the things now. It's funny because just before this, we came on, and we'll probably put links to this and we'll use audio for this. There was a TV show in the late 70s, early 80s that was like the occult TV show on mainstream.
One of them. I mean, there was a couple back then, but
it was a show called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, and they'd do like stories about whatever occult things or ancient alien. It was ancient aliens before.
It was the ancient aliens of that time. Yeah.
Basically. Right. And 1 month before Phil died, they did an entire episode about Pike. And they got a lot of details wrong. If you know the actual history of Bishop Pike, and including one of them, they said that Marin Hackett committed suicide because Pike turned her down, wasn't interested in a romance with her.
Really? Whoa. They got it that wrong, huh?
They got it that wrong because not only were they having an affair, but they had a secret apartment and they were completely dependent on each other. So and it was
what's in the book.
Now, the way they could say we got it right is that Marin wanted Pike to leave his wife and marry her.
Well, see, that is not in the book, that he was still married. I mean, according to the book, his wife had died, so.
Yeah, and that they changed.
Just an easy out for Dick to tell the story without that complication.
Yeah, in real life, he was still married, and he had another assistant that he eventually had an affair with after Marin killed herself, and he did divorce the first wife and marry that woman before he died.
That episode.
Well, she's the one that died with him, right?
She actually survived.
Oh, she survived that.
Okay. She survived in the desert, and he didn't. So because he sent her to go get help, and then she managed to make it back. And she's interviewed in the In Search Of.
Okay, but all this to me begs the question: would it have benefited the story if PKD had just made himself instead of the angel character?
Well,
doesn't he try to do that in Radio Free Albemuth?
I have no idea. I haven't read
it. All right.
One thing that came to my mind when you guys were talking is that the image of PKD hiding behind these characters, specifically in the Archer novel. Now, what do I mean by hiding behind the characters? I mean, in part, I think he wants us to, well, again, now I'm falling into David's biographical trap.
Get sucked in.
Let me, I'll try it. I like the idea of him trying to, create authentic characters, but failing to do so.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, kind of being conscious of the fact that he's failing to do so and sort of gleefully hiding behind them, but not.
Yeah. Well, that's the quote.
I think that's adding intent to what's ultimately what you say is a failure.
Right.
I don't think there's intent behind that. Like the failure is, it doesn't have a side note of intent behind it, a soupçon of intent.
Right.
It's just failure at that point. So he's trying to hide behind these characters, as many authors do. I mean, there's so many authors that have their their analog as their main character in a story.
Mm-hmm.
But he's doing it in a way that I think hurts the story in this novel.
So you think it would be more effective if he more visibly, I guess, used himself?
Yeah, I mean, to choose a fictional character that is the wife of someone and then not give that character any life, any anima,
Yeah,
is sort of is a huge failure, I think.
Well, and I actually think it would have been more dramatic if Pike was or Archer was married like Pike was. Because that added to it. Because like here he's on trial for heresy, and he's having an affair with a woman and has an apartment in the Tenderloin.
But I mean, that's a story he just threw aside, as well as the heresy case.
Well, and part of it is that very few people knew about the affair. Phil happened to know about it because it was his mother-in-law, right? And like, so he had some secret knowledge here. And one of the funny things is that he was really disturbed by Pike's death. And I would be thinking, like, I'd be more disturbed by the fact that your mother-in-law committed suicide over an affair with this guy. Like, why would you be so upset that he went and got himself like killed in the desert?
But, I mean, that to me makes sense.
Yeah, but
I mean, there's familial ties, and then there's sort of a tie of respect or admiration for someone, and that tie of admiration and respect is sometimes going to be greater than familial.
Well, part of Pike's death being like kind of affecting Phil is because it came on the heels of it all happened bang bang boom with the mother-in-law's suicide, one of his cats died, Tony Boucher died, and then that's why 1967 he didn't write a novel until Galactic Popular in November, because he was going through like a lot of this stuff. Like it was the suicide of so Pike didn't die till 1968, I think, until the next year, till after he'd written Galactic Popular.
What a great jester response to that is to write Galactic Pot Healer after all that tragedy, to write a very funny novel.
Book. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you know to what, I mean, I remember reading somewhere that didn't, just as Bill Lundberg thinks that Archer is sort of singing through him, didn't Phil think that Pike was inside of him or something, or that he could access him?
Manifest in him?
I don't know that he says anything about that, but we do have a good quote on page 58 of the final conversation.
The bishop, for example, is based on an actual bishop that I knew, and I'm not supposed to say who, because then they'll all come in and sue. There's a big disclaimer in the front of the book. It says, "Warning, this book is utterly fictitious, and none of the people ever existed. And if you think otherwise, you're wrong," unquote. But it's based on an actual bishop that I actually knew, and this man was one of the most educated people in the universe, as they say Latin, Hebrew, Greek, and the Bible backwards and forwards. So he's forever quoting things which I have no access to. Well, now in that case, I simply look them up. I mean, I just simply get out my Bible and get out books on the Bible and stuff like that. And I remembered my actual friend, but with her, there's no model. Her being Angel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so here's the funny thing. That warning is not in this book. And every damn person knows that he's writing about Pike. And there's no possible way that anyone would ever imagine that he's writing about anybody else.
Yeah, but I mean, there is no lawsuit there either. There's nothing they could do, even if he says it. That's
right.
That's ridiculous.
And the hilarious thing is that it comes out a couple months after Mr. Spock is on primetime TV telling the whole story.
Yeah.
So wait, that was my question from before. That episode, did this novel prompt that episode, or was it did it come out before?
They came out around the same time, which would have been
But it was probably just chance, though,
It was
right?
just chance. It was just chance. And here's the thing. I'm sure if you're Phil watching that episode of In Search of, there's a couple times where you're sitting on your Santa Ana couch going, that's bullshit. That's bullshit.
But you're also thinking, wait, they just told the story that I'm going to tell that's coming out in 1 month. That's kind of
great.
Like, taking the wind out of my sails.
Or that's really great for promoting the book that people will want to get that story. But because Phil was not as famous as he is now, they don't mention him once in the In Search Of. I think if you were doing an In Search Of now,
plastered all over the thing.
It would be all about like Phil going to the seance and like, doing all that, and his mother-in-law being the one that he had the affair with. And you definitely, if you did it now, Phil would be all over the fucking thing.
Yes.
So, and this novel, they would probably mention that this novel
100 times as well.
Yeah. And so if you did In Search Of now, you would definitely you would have that involvement. So okay, so let's see if there's anything. So the gas station scene I think is really interesting for setting up Bishop Pike, because that's the whole thing that shows that he's famous. And I have a feeling that is a real thing that happened, that Phil saw, is like that interaction, maybe not necessarily at a gas station, but I'm sure he saw and having to explain to people like
what part of that is the famous part?
Hold on, I'm pull it up.
To me, it just means it just showed that he was a distracted man who didn't have time for tangible objects.
Yeah, which is important, but it's also so it shows that
objects is redundant, but
yeah, he's like, the attendant's like, you destroyed my pump, right? And he's like,
I did?
Yeah, but he's like, this is a great man. He marched with Martin Luther King. He's the friend of Robert Kennedy.
The part where he gets away with it. Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And then this just shows that like it's funny because he was famous.
Fame has its benefits.
Well, it's also showing that he was famous in some circles, but some people didn't know him. He wasn't like, it's not like he was Brad Pitt out there where everybody's going to know who he is. I guess that for the era, let's say Steve McQueen, like they don't, but at the same time, he's famous enough that you could be like, oh, he marched with Martin Luther King and all that. So, which is, just, I thought that was an interesting scene, a really important scene. The heresy trial, was mentioned as early as page 17, which I was surprised by.
Yeah, but it's gone by page 45.
Right. But this is the way where it connects to Valis the most, the debate over if the Holy Ghost was in fact the form of God, equal to Yahweh and Christ, surely he would still be with us. And the fact that it's funny because Pike was, known for being on trial for heresy, but what I think is interesting here, and what's one of the most interesting things that Phil can do for people who maybe studied Pike or are interested in Pike, is that Phil was actually having these conversations with Pike. And one of the things that Bishop Pike in real life, like, was controversial for is this whole thing that, like, I want to go to Israel and prove that God was either real or that Jesus was real or not, and all these things. These are interesting things for like setting up Phil for the exegesis years. And the thing is that imagine if Pike had been around for the exegesis years. I'm sure, like, I don't know if he would have been calling them.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. When did Pike die?
I believe 68, but
wow, it was that early. Okay.
Yeah. So he was long gone by the time of the
exegesis and
the exegesis
Valis and all that stuff.
Well, and we got 2,000 pages of the exegesis. I mean, if Pike had been around, maybe there'd be 3,000.
Or maybe there'd be 200.
Yeah, maybe it would have been.
It could have gone the other way. He might have been able to get it down to specific thoughts.
Would these guys talk on the phone at all? Like would Phil call him and say, "Hey, I got an idea here. Let's talk it out for a couple hours."
They were known for having big, long conversations. I'll pull out Sutton's book. I know it's 149.50, I think, is the whole interaction between them. But yeah, so I mean, they were involved enough that like Pike invited him and Nancy to join him and Marin at the seance, right? And which was funny because Phil like thought that was silly, right? And didn't believe in,
as does Angel.
Right. And so and then so I think they were friends enough that he invited them to that thing, and he thanks Phil and Nancy in the afterword or the foreword for his book about The Other Side: My Experiences with Psychic Phenomenon by Bishop James Pike. And in the foreword, it mentions Phil says, "I am nevertheless grateful to all who have shared of themselves, especially my good friends, Mr. and Mrs. Phil Dick." And in the body of the book, he talks a lot about the suicide. So that would actually be an interesting book to read. I didn't have the gumption to read it. I thought about it
at this time
for this one, but I was like, I don't know. I
asked that question originally just because I can imagine Phil and, instead of, say, writing the exegesis with such vitality, let's say, spending a lot of that time talking to, Pike and trying, because essentially he was working things out in that exegesis, but at the same time,
he was talking to Doris about this stuff every night over dinner.
So if he had someone else to bounce those ideas off of, we might not have ever gotten the exegesis.
But don't you think too, though, he was very much aware of it, but being and becoming, always in a state of becoming, a literary artifact in his oeuvre. I don't think he lost sight of that.
I do think he was having those conversations with Doris every night over dinner. They would get Chinese food and talk about, she was studying for the priesthood and coming home every day, and she was having those kinds of discussions with him. And that's one of the reasons why I think it was so hard for him when she moved out, which of course inspired Divine Invasion. And that was partially just, and how many times did he ask her to move in? I mean, Doris was essential for the exegesis years. But
one of these things, one thing in this book actually cleared something up about Doris. I believe she was a deacon, right? At the beginning, about whether women should be called deaconess or deacon, and he's vying for everyone being called deacon, equal rights, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, it was weird that she was studying for the priesthood in that era. It was like an uncommon thing, but she was a very serious religious scholar in her own right. And one of the reasons, and so I think she had a lot to do with a lot of his ideas in this era. So let's see. I know, judging from some things that go on in the book, I was interested in page 131 of the Mariner edition. I have no faith in the reality of Christ, he informed us. This is Timothy Archer talking. None whatsoever. I cannot in good conscience go on preaching the Cura Gamma of the New Testament. I think that's how you say it. Every time I get up in front of my congregation, I feel like I am deceiving them. If you watch the In Search Of, this is straight out of his final, this scene, there's a recording of it that he got up and spoke to the church and gave his final speech.
So to his congregation?
Yeah. And so this scene, they have a excerpt of the recording of it on the In Search Of. I don't know if it's an actor. I think it's his real voice. But and it's kind of funny, like, it was a pretty big deal that Pike got up there and was like, I feel like I'm deceiving all of you and I got to step away. But he still obviously wanted to prove all this stuff, and enough so that he went out in the desert with a Coke and
and not much else.
Yeah. Good planning. I think we'll be okay with this Coke.
That passage you read in the novel, doesn't that occur? His doubt sort of creeps in like a goddamn anvil, right? Falling, because in the chapter before, if I'm not mistaken, he's like, I have complete confidence in Jesus Christ, God, and everything. And then he totally turns on a dime. He's like, fuck it, nothing's true.
Yeah.
So the thought, just an aside, is the thought type is called an overvalent thought.
Oh,
okay. The thought that takes over a brain and basically destroys it.
Is that a clinical term? Overvalent thought?
I didn't look it up. I
use the word valence periodically.
Yeah. And I think this is, what is this? Latin or something? ID fix?
Yeah. Idea, yeah. I mean, valent, to have a certain meaning. So if something's overvalent, it's too much. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was what he used for that, like that Jeff as a ghost thought.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting way of doing it, and it's one of the more cool ideas that got presented here in this here book in Phil style. Page 173 of the Mariner edition, there's a really interesting part as far as revealing Pike's character, and I had this is after Kirsten's suicide. I had expected to find him red-eyed and distraught. However, to my surprise, Tim looked stronger, more powerfully put together, even in a literal sense, larger than I had ever seen him before. And then he destroyed her suicide note, right? And then later on the page it says, what did the note say? The part I destroyed? I don't remember. It's gone. It had to do with us, her feelings about me. I had no choice. As to it being suicide, there's no doubt. And the motives, of course, is her fear that she had cancer again, and they're aware that she was a barbiturate addict. So this is a really interesting scene for how Phil viewed Pike, because his dismissal of Kirsten's suicide is really fucked up. And he's saying a couple things here that Archer's like, oh, that he's almost like free. Like, oh, yeah, she's gone now. He's stronger. That's a dick move. Not a Philip K. Dick move, but an actual, like, asshole. I'll say asshole move. And then the idea that he's like, oh, yeah, she was afraid she got cancer again and was going to be found out for being on drugs. When in reality...
Again, no culpability.
No culpability.
I am not part of this suicide.
And I think that Phil, who was so destroyed by Pike's death when he was in Israel, I think Phil, all these years later, this is, in hindsight, revisionist history of like him looking back and being like, yeah, he was really flippant about that. Or, yeah, he saw that. I don't think Phil saw that at the time. I think Phil saw that when he was writing the book in 1981.
Yeah.
So I can't prove that. That's just my theory. But I think that's how I read this part of the book. And so real life versus novel, I don't care. I'm just looking at the novel and saying this character, Angel Archer, was looking at him and saying, what a dick. He doesn't even care. And that's
from someone who obviously doesn't care about anything.
Yeah. Doesn't
well,
care.
She's kind. I mean, like Phil, we could say, Angel's just a narcissist, right?
She's an absolute narcissist.
Yeah.
Smarter
if we want to break down certain qualities.
A smarter narcissist.
I like that she cries about the abstract, but about the actual, like, tangible things that happen in her life, no feelings whatsoever.
There's a disconnect.
She'll cry about the thought of, Bill possibly being in a hospital and sad, and how that breaks her heart, and how he might not ever, like, achieve anything in his life because he's got that mental deficiency, as she puts it. But, like, the death of her husband, nothing.
Is that what's at the core of your distaste for Angel? The way in which
I'm not sure. I think it's many leveled, my distaste for Angel.
But you're right. There is a
on the doll where
disproportion.
Angel hurt you.
She does seem to have a disproportionate means of reacting to things in a way that is not always that you wouldn't expect, right?
Now, I do have something from the coda, but we can save that to talk about the coda. And other than that, I'm done on Bishop Pike / Archer as just a character.
Well, so I have one kind of funny thing that I want to mention, and it's the I never saw Bill thing again.
Yeah.
So he literally, in the book it says, I never saw Bill again. We see Bill about 5 more times after that. And he also talks about, like, just being next to the famous person, and how that, to me, is sort of, it has a meta element where no one was like, hey, Phil, shouldn't we edit this part out where you fucking said that you never saw this guy again, but then you see him a couple pages later? Like, there's some meta element in there where this mistake is not changed.
And Bill's an android. He is the eternal recurrence, right? He keeps coming back even when he's gone, of Phil's many habiphrenic androids. He's an android.
Right. Yeah, he is Bill. Basically an android. But that is so, it's so easy to fix. But no one ever, no copy of this book has ever fixed that.
And I'm glad Bill's in there. He, like David earlier, you started out by saying, well, this isn't completely controlled. This isn't completely coherent. And Bill is one of the reasons why it's not, I think. Which is why he's my favorite character. That's why I love it.
Yeah, you're going to be the Minority Report on the coda, I think, Larry.
Yeah, well, I don't care about that. Yeah. Okay, so the other issue, and this is an issue throughout, but I'm just going to bring it up now. And we've talked about this a couple of times, but all of Dick's dialogue, I think Dick is a terrible dialogue writer. I'm going to say that straight out. Every voice in Dick's book, when they're speaking, sounds like PKD. That's it. No one has a different voice. No one uses any different language. No one uses any different words. They use absolutely the same pitch, tone. Everything is absolutely the same in his dialogue.
So I reply, gobble, gobble.
Now, also, I tend to agree with Larry quite a bit. In fact, I've had many conversations with many people about this.
I don't disagree with Larry either. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to say gobble, gobble, because that's one person who did speak differently.
But no, there are exceptions too. Like Tagomi,
of course.
Tagomi, for instance.
45 novels. There's bound to be exceptions.
Right. But no, I think it's not for lack of trying, though. Sometimes that's the thing.
Well, I just think
that wasn't one of his strong points. Yeah, no, for sure.
That is not his forte.
No, but sometimes he tried, and again, it didn't. It often didn't turn out so well. Yeah.
But in this novel specifically, where you have, I mean, this is about people, right? And so you want the people to sound different. You want them to have their personality. You want all these things, but there's none of that in there. It's all, everybody basically, except for maybe Archer, who just has more to say than anyone else. Everyone else speaks the same way.
Yeah.
Well, and it's
phrasing, the same, every syntax, everything is the same.
And you guys would know better. Is there a California sort of affect? I mean, something.
Not in his writing.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, not in the dialogue.
I think the book that shows the most difference and has the best dialogue and shows people talking differently is obviously Scanner Darkly. That's the best example of him breaking that.
Man in the High Castle.
Yeah. I think Tagomi, the way that staccato with which he speaks, because English isn't his first language, if I'm not mistaken, is among the most unique dialogues that Dick creates for one of his characters.
But obviously, in general, he doesn't differentiate dialogue.
Yes, I agree for sure.
And
right.
That I found kind of bothersome in this book specifically.
I remember thinking that when I first started reading Philip K. Dick, and then because back then I thought I knew everything, but then at the same time, after I read a few books, I'm like, I don't give a shit. This is fucking awesome. I'm gonna get
right. But right. I mean, I worked in theater for 25 years, whatever it was, and the cadence of voice, everything about voice is important to me.
Yep.
So not having that in a novel should be more important. But reading Dick, it sort of does take a backseat, which is why I'm not mentioning it. I didn't mention it much until we're on the 39th novel, something like that.
No, you've mentioned it before, I believe.
Yeah, I've mentioned it, but I haven't made it a point of conversation.
So we already talked about so I'm going to move on from Pike, but we'll talk about him more, of course, because he's the center of this novel. But Edgar Barefoot is based on Alan Watts, the British mystic, who was famous for bringing Zen to the hippies in California.
Okay, yeah.
Kirsten Lundberg
showed up somewhere in something. Electric Kool-Aid acid test, maybe Hell's Angels or one of those. And Kesey thing or
so page 33 is important for the introduction of Kirsten Lundberg, who is based off Marin Hackett, the mother-in-law of Nancy. And so
the mother-in-law of Phil.
Phil, Nancy's mother. And there's some interesting things. It says, Bishop Archer's future depends on Kirsten not flying into a rage one day and phoning up the Chronicle. His future depends on her unending goodwill. And then
this is her freak out.
Yeah, and then Jeff, her husband, says Kirsten's is on reds. You don't know that. I suspect it. Her mood changes. I've seen her take them, yellow jackets, barbiturates, sleeping pills. Everybody takes something. You smoke grass. And then, so this is an interesting thing because this sets up so much of the dynamic between them that's like and I think one thing that, especially if you watch like the In Search Of, you'd never think that Marin had this kind of power over Pike. And I think that's one of the reasons why Pike felt so free when Marin killed herself, is because I think that they were fighting a lot, and they were, the fact that they had this secret apartment, she probably did. She could have ended his everything by just making a phone call. And so I think this scene is really important and explains why later Pike doesn't seem to be so bummed that his mistress has committed suicide. It's because he probably, I don't know, I'm just reading into this, but I think that's.
But this is all supposition. I mean, this is all
sure
one character, sort of creating a scenario. But you think that's what the actual scenario became?
Yeah, and my thing is that Pike / Archer had these two suicides in his life. One, his son, and if you're a bishop and you're it's like that whole thing of like the glass houses, like he had all these suicides related to him, and he had all these things going on. It was like he was already on trial for,
But
heresy.
but also power breeds a certain type of ignorance.
Yeah.
There's there's people that have so much power that they no longer need to worry about the day-to-day I don't know, the worries that we have as regular people. They're concerned about loftier things, as they would like to put them. But then, the problems of I'm like Pike saying, I have, I love this woman. It's an infatuation, basically. It's a fast love affair that lasts longer than it should. And so him saying that it's a something that he can handle, and that Angel's worries don't mean a thing, is sort of like an intentional blindness.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking at it like, no matter what happens, I'm super powerful, so I can get past it.
I was going to ask a question, actually. One of the ways that that's done with, for instance, a celebrity, they have entourages, right, of various kinds that do their sort of particulars for them, everyday stuff. Did Pike have one of those? The real Pike? Yeah.
Marin.
Oh,
just mistress. Yeah.
Oh, okay. He didn't have like a big cabinet or something like that. It was.
No, Marin was his secretary, and then the woman that, after she died, the woman that was with him in Israel, like, took over that role.
Oh,
yeah.
Like Phil, perhaps, in that respect. I mean, Phil always needed somebody to help him out in that respect. Yeah.
So do you think that scene's true, that Pike asked Phil to go with him to Israel?
No. Oh, well, maybe he did. Yeah. Because they talked about these issues.
And that's why Pike in the book gets so upset when he says, "Do you want to sleep with me?" Because it was Bill Dick.
Segue.
No.
Speaking of homosexual panic, so Archer's son / Pike's son. It's funny, in the In Search Of, they refer to his suicide that he may have had concerns about his masculinity. Is the way they worded it.
Oh, really?
And Phil goes at this directly on page 55. One of the strangest, most perplexing accounts I read concerning my husband's suicide was that he, Jeff Archer, Bishop Timothy Archer's son, killed himself because he was afraid he was a homosexual. Some book written a number of years after his death, after all three of them had died, mangled the facts so thoroughly that when you finish reading it, I don't even remember the title or who wrote it, you know less about Jeff and Bishop Archer and Kirsten Lumberg than before you started. It's like, and this is the interesting part, it's like information theory. It is noise driving out signal. But it is noise posing as signal, so you do not even recognize the noise. The intelligence agencies call it disinformation, something the Soviet bloc relies heavily on. If you can float disinformation into your circulation, you will totally abolish everyone's contact with reality, probably your own included. That's
the entire world now.
Exactly. Yeah. That's probably the smartest part of the book.
Yeah, right.
And it's what you just read is it's very science fictional, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dystopian futures and
indicative of the degree to which we now live in a science fiction novel.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I believe somebody once wrote that the science fiction novel's dead now in the 21st century because of this idea. I don't remember who that person is.
That's one of my theses. Yeah. I mean, that's not particularly unique,
Yeah.
So,
long time.
The beginning of this novel is amazing. Dick, we talked about in the last episode how he obviously had charm. He puts that charm on the page in the first 30 pages of this. That old vagina joke. Oh, the vagina. It's not about an old vagina. It's an old vagina joke. That kind of thing, where he's, just the charm and the cleverness comes through in his writing so distinctly, so fully in those first couple of chapters, where it's very pithy and intelligent, and you can see how people would immediately love to be near this guy. That's at least that's my impression. Let's say.
I agree with you, and he seems very much more than ever, and rightly so. I guess this is his last published book, at least, in command of his authorship.
Yeah,
at
least in that first,
as much as he can be,
that first quarter.
Right. I guess this is more Archer stuff, but I want to talk about the way this book meta comments on Pike's book, right? In some really hilarious ways, but also meta comments on Phil.
Also, I have the other quote. Successfully trying someone for heresy in the 1970s was really difficult. That's another quote.
Okay.
I just thought that was super clever.
On page 104 of the Mariner edition, Bishop Timothy Archer, a lawyer, a scholar, a sane adult, could see a pin on a bed sheet beside his mistress and leap to the conclusion that his dead son was communicating with him from another world. Moreover, Tim was writing it all up in a book that would first be published and then read. He not only believed nonsense, he believed it in a public way. Which is interesting. Now, one of the things that the In Search of, one of the conjectures that the In Search of made is that they were like, maybe this happened, maybe that happened. They suggested that maybe Marin was doing all this to make him think his son was still alive.
Well, that's exactly what I thought was happening.
Okay.
Didn't you guys think that?
That it was I didn't get that from
stopping the clocks and all that stuff, that it was her.
Yeah, that went over my head. I didn't get that. But that's I think that just slipped by.
I absolutely assumed that it was her stopping the clocks, breaking the mirrors, putting the pins on the bed to create this illusion that something supernatural was happening.
Well, the In Search
Archer wouldn't have done it himself. He even says so. Do you believe that we would do that on purpose, or we would, it's something had to happen to make him believe this stuff. It didn't just come out of the blue. He didn't create it without certain markers, right? No?
Well, he's probably, he loves to cultivate ambiguity too.
Are you talking about Dick, or?
I'm talking about Dick writing that in as a potential explanation for what's going on, but not confirming it.
But he also, Dick explains it away as in probably the clearest terms. He says, the guilt that those two felt over the suicide of Jeff, and other aspects of their relationship, the hidden nature of their relationship, brought them to a point where only the supernatural could explain it. It could relieve them of those feelings. You got it. You're killing me.
Well, honestly,
killing me here.
Because I'm going back to the book.
He's trying to move on, but no, I hear what you're saying, Larry. And that part, so I remember now that you mention it, repeatedly there are these, the image of, for instance, the pin going in the fingernail, is that's like, for me anyway, visually, that's tantamount to, fingernails on a blackboard. That is not an image.
But it's not something that actually happened. There's no evidence of that happening.
Right.
What he says is that the evidence is a pin being on the bed. So it's not that happened. It's that she said it happened.
Right, but I'm saying he repeatedly implants that image or puts, plasters it on our mind screens, right? I remember it like 3 different times. Yeah. And but for my part, for whatever reason, I didn't pick up on that as a clue. That's all I'm saying. I think what you're saying is there's a thesis, an argument, and you have evidence to support it.
All right. Well, back to his book.
Yes. Go ahead. Hey, by the way, David, what's the name of Archer's book? I can't remember it.
Well, that's exactly what we're about to talk about. So here's the thing. Like, the book that actually got published in the world was called The Other Side, right? And was like this scandalous best-selling book about how he communicated with his son on the other side. Now, on page 164 through 167 is the whole scene where Angel is talking to Pike about the book, and Kirsten comes up with a title. What do you think of the title? Hear Tyrant Death. And I wrote with my highlighter, bad Phil title.
Right. Exactly what I thought. Exactly.
And this is, of course, a running theme on our show, is the bad Phil titles. And I thought he was kind of making fun of himself here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That, like, oh, do you like this title that I came up with? I think he probably
I didn't like that title. No one likes that title.
I bet Hear Tyrant Death was really a title that he suggested to Pike. I
right, for something. Who knows what?
200% believe that was the title that he suggested to Pike.
I also have on my notes, I have talking about transmigration and why he used transmigration instead of any other word. Death.
Okay, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
the change. There's all kinds of words he could have used instead of transmigration, but I feel like Dick, who one of his greatest, greatest assets was being able to use words that are not just the right word, but the best word. So, and sometimes they're above my pay grade, and transmigration is one of those words that's above my pay grade. It doesn't mean just like reincarnation or death or any of those things. It has all those elements plus more in it. It's a perfect word that Phil chose to describe the death of Timothy Archer.
But that's also why you're wrong about the coda, because this title explains why the coda is so important.
Right? Well, the coda is crap, but it's. But no, do you want to talk about the coda now?
but it had transmigration. I agree with you again. It is the perfect word. If nothing else, it combines transcendence to another. That word embodies a lot of Phil Dickian themes: transcendence, as well as migration. He's migrating to another realm or landscape or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's everything that Phil Dick had ever done in his career in one word.
So on page 203 is when we really get into the trip to Israel. And when Timothy Archer flew to Israel, the NBC network mentioned it briefly. They would mention, as they would the mention a flight of birds or a migration too regular to be important, and yet something the viewers should be told about. I got a card from him. This is later on the page. But the card arrived after the big news coverage, the late-breaking sensational story of Bishop Archer's abandoned Datsun found its rear end off the little rutted winding road, up a jutting rock, a gas station map still on the right-hand front seat where he left it.
But we never get to know what that card said.
No. Which is interesting. But, okay, so there's the real-life events. thing. That's the last one. Like he went to die with his Datsun and his Coke.
I have one question. Do either one of you know what double domed was supposed to mean? I tried to look it up, but I couldn't find anything on double domed.
What's the context?
The context in the novel is, I think it has something to do with the church, but
breasts.
Yeah, well, that's the
always. Although actually in this book, well, no, in the later stuff that's not his fetishization of boobs.
He uses double domed about I think 4 or 5 times in here in the context of the church, but I couldn't find any reference to that outside of this novel. So I was wondering if that was something that I just wasn't aware of.
Catholic thing, maybe? I don't know.
Could be.
So the interesting thing about him choosing to write this book as well, which is something that maybe this should have been in the writing and publication history, but anyways, because I'm the guy who's writing the book on the unfinished work of PKD, I know that after Divine Invasion, the first thing he did was write a 2-page outline for a novel called The Acts of Paul, which would have been a alternate history novel about the Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus never happening, and a guy basically having the Paul conversion story happen to him 2,000 years later, like after Manichaeism became the dominant world religion. That's a lot, I know. But where he comments on Paul, because he was thinking a lot about Paul, but so for whatever reason, he had this idea for Acts of Paul, and he had the Bishop Pike novel. He chose to write the Bishop Pike novel. However, he does comment on Paul on page 41. He says, Paul, had been a Pharisee. I don't know what that word. For them, a strict observance.
Pharisee is basically the Jewish people in charge of Jerusalem at that time.
That's right. Paul, had been a Pharisee. For them, a strict observance of the minutiae of the Torah, the law, was everything. That particularly involved ritual purity, but later, after his conversion, he saw salvation not in the law. I don't know that word, which is the state of righteousness that Jesus Christ brings. I want to sit down with him here. And then, so he talks a lot about Paul on this page, and then later it says Roman 5 states Paul's basic premise that we are saved through the grace and not by his works. It's just
that is the worst. Is that you're not saved by the good you do, you're saved by your belief.
Yeah,
it's just a horrible idea.
It's just interesting to me that he's talking so much about Paul because I think he was thinking so much about it, but he never wrote this novel, and we don't know if he would have came back to that idea of Paul, but we know he was planning to write Owl in the Daylight next. So he may have just abandoned that idea as being too complicated, too weird.
Where Phil was going after this would have been like my jam. Just would have been my jam. Like he was going in this direction of authors that I've read tons of novels of, and it would have fit in that pantheon of people I would have read religiously back.
Well, you do know that the next one was a science fiction novel. That when we talked earlier that he had the contract for 2 books. The second was Owl in the Daylight, and that was a very, very science fictional concept.
It depends on how he wrote it, though.
Yeah.
If he was still in that exegesis mindset, it would have been science fiction, but it would have been, sort of carrying on those themes of religious understanding.
Well, the concept of Owl in the Daylight, like what he was going to be writing, is it's a phenomenal concept for a novel, which is about aliens who live on a planet where everybody has their own individual atmosphere. They live in so they don't live in a collective atmosphere, so they have no sound. They've never had sound.
Oh, wow.
And then they come to Earth and discover music and it's like they think our world is heaven because we have this amazing music, and it's all about them learning about sound. It was an incredible concept.
I can see him being totally pretentious about that one too.
Yeah.
Because if you think of the Valis trilogy, culminating in Archer, it's really about, a bird's eye view, an exploration of right ideology and belief.
Yeah.
I mean, he's invested in probing belief and how it sort of affects people. And it always, if you ask me, the further you go back in history, the more humanity's a piece of shit because of their dipshit beliefs. My thesis personally is belief is the end of reason and the beginning of evil. I mean, think of all the wars in humanity. It's little men and their big beliefs. Right. I can't say it enough. Look at culture today and what's happening in the U.S. with higher education, among other things. Little men and their big beliefs.
Yeah.
Holy hell. But Phil, again, falling into the biographical trap, the more time I spend with ags in particular, the more I actually become, I think, a biographical scholar, among other things. But I wonder if yes, obviously he was interested in belief and religion and all of this. I wonder if he actually believed, though.
No, he didn't.
I think he was an agnostic, ultimately, not a Gnostic, an agnostic.
He was an agnostic. That's the thing about him, though, is he respected belief, but he couldn't do it himself.
Yeah.
It's to me, it's one of the more powerful aspects of his personality is that he wanted to believe and he couldn't.
Right. And I find myself in a similar predicament. And you're right, David. He was who he needed to be, depending upon who he was talking to.
If he was talking to Tim Powers, he absolutely believed. If he was talking to K.W. Jeter, he did not.
But that just tells you that he was not a believer. Because believers believe. There is no company that matters if they believe or not.
Believers believe, and if they believe, the harder they believe, the more people get hurt. That's what happens.
Well, but see, my thing about it, I actually do think he was a believer to a degree. I think it's interesting to think about the exegesis and how much, was just him spinning.
That's an intellectual study, though. That's not belief.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when you talk about things like where he'll go off on tangents about how the Roman Empire never ended and how we're stuck in time. And then it's like, is he having a thought experiment or does he really think that's happening? Like, that's where Professor Wilson's book is going to be so interesting because the infinite regressions of how much of this is biography and how much isn't,
And I mean, since you gave me that idea, you and David Gill, when I'm rereading these books now, I see that infinite regression everywhere, more so than I ever have before. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do have a quote that I want to read.
Go.
And it is Bill, so.
Oh, good.
It's your favorite character.
That's right.
And we'll talk about it afterwards. Much mental illness stems from people repressing their hostility and trying to be nice, too nice. The hostility can't be repressed forever. Everybody has it. It has to come out. So I had some issues in my youth and some violent issues, we'll say. And I had to take an anger management class. And basically, anger management teaches you that you have to let it out. If you're angry, don't repress it. Let it out, but let it out in a healthy way. And that's exactly what he's talking about here. Of course, then he goes on to punch a window out. But
Anthony might think you need that money back from that class.
But it's a... No, if I repressed any of my anger, I'd kill someone. So it has to come out.
I'm just talking with.
And anger management is because it's sublimation, right? You get mad, you channel it in socially acceptable ways.
I mean, yes, exactly what you're. But you can't just say, I'm going to be angry, but I'm not going to let it out.
Right.
Right? Because that builds up, and then you do whatever is happening in America right now. We don't need to go into that, but I mean, it's great that he has that in this book. Like he says Bill is the only sane character in the book, and that to me just defined it right there.
Which is to say, Phil's calling himself sane there, even as he calls himself a hebephrenic. Is it hebephrenic or Heba?
Heba.
Yeah.
It's not called that anymore. It's and we've talked.
Isn't it like schizoaffective or something like that?
It's disorganized schizophrenia.
Oh, okay.
I have one scene that one part that I hated that before we get to the coda and then get into our final.
I like stuff that you hate.
Page 81. What the hell is with the racist joke? And that was like terrible. The Kirsten,
is that the series of racist jokes or
the series of racist jokes that Kirsten makes, and that could be just like I wonder
a connection that those two have.
Yeah, it's just that whole scene, like it doesn't stop. Like after it starts like getting into the racist stuff, like I don't even want to read the
Oh dear me, let's clutch some pearls.
Well,
it's racist.
But in its context, is he trying to develop a familiarity between two white characters, I guess?
I mean, that is basically what it is a connection that these two have. It's like a bit. It's a bit that these two carry out. Neither one of them is racist, but they tell the racist jokes as a bit that connects them.
Right. I
understand your dislike of that thing is we all dislike those things.
It's just an ugly scene. And
it does come back later too with the there's a Mexican joke later, but
yeah. Well, yeah, it gets both.
But then it's also there's the guy, the barefoot, who takes care of two Mexican children until their parent comes home. So, I mean, if you want this to be biography or autobiographical and stuff like that, you're going to have to accept those things with the other things.
But absolutely. Weirdly, I think possibly Phil might be with stuff like that. He might be trying to convey, and there are other, for me anyway, signs of this, convey that he's in fact not racist.
Yeah.
That, in fact, he has a familiar, the whole, hey, I have black friends, that sort of thing writ large, that he has a familiarity with that culture.
The boomer, I'm not racist thing.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly,
I have a black friend.
Yeah, well,
it's horrible.
That was not that was just
but the further we go back in time, the worse things get, and in this case the more racism is embedded in society and culture,
yeah.
But but David, to be honest, in that time that was supposed to be a sign of non-racism.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I get it. It's just
but I understand your modern sensibility.
I mean, hey, don't get us wrong. It is racist, but I do think that it was Phil trying not to.
Yeah.
It's so backwards.
Well, I was kind of waiting for somebody to be like, hey, stop talking that way or something. Like, then I don't know. It was hard. I just didn't like it. But I think.
But yeah, you're fine with Dick having these female characters that are absolutely...
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm not fine with that at all. I hate that about a lot of his work. That's one of the reasons why you guys love Clans of the Alphane Moon and I don't, Like,
but she was an asshole. So.
Well, but I thought that was a really ridiculous character.
Yeah, we're not going to get into that one.
No, I'm not getting into Clans of the Alphane Moon. So let's get to the coda, because the coda, so we can end this at some point.
Yeah.
The coda, okay, look, and
should I lay out my minority report first, and then you guys can respond to it?
Do that.
So I saw no value in it, other than the doctor telling off Angel, because there was no need for Archer to come back in any kind of way. The story is finalized when she, talks about the robot part. This is a robotic this, robotic that, whatever. She doesn't. There is no accomplishment at the end of the coda. There's no bright side. There's no dark side. There's no side whatsoever. It's just, should she take in Bill, which I guess was a minor plot point in the second chapter. That her and her husband should talk to Bill, and she said no. But I did not see why it was there.
All right, you ready for me to argue?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm also gonna make Professor Wilson's head explode, because this is going to be heavily structuralist writing talk. Yeah. Because it's funny, because part of me, I know what a lot of people are thinking is that this part of the book is where he loses his coherence and his structure, but I disagree, because this is, to me, where the parallels and reversals are set up and paid off in the book, where and anybody who knows my philosophy of storytelling knows I love me some parallels and reversals, and set up some payoffs. So to me, the title and everything, and the whole story, the payoff is that Phil observing Bishop Pike's life and telling the story of Timothy Archer, the setup and payoff is that Archer comes back in some form in this spiritual way, that he either, so Pike in real life was either full of shit, right, and making all this stuff up about talking to his son, and he got all this notoriety and fame because he was going on Canadian TV and talking to his son through his psychic, right? And so the parallel, the reversal of that, is that Pike comes back in this novel and is living in this other dude and is speaking to him. But of course, this guy could be full of shit, right? So to me, that's the parallel, that's the setup and the reversal. That's the reason to tell the whole novel in the first place, is to have Timothy Archer transmigrate to the spiritual realm and speak back to the characters. That's the story. That's why the coda works. That's why...
That's ridiculous. That's fucking ridiculous.
Wait, Lair, did you like the end of Ubik? Where when Ron,
I rarely like Phil K. Dick coda.
Because it does the same thing with when Glenn runs. It puts basically the last chapter ends on a note of ambiguity, wherein Glenn runs it, or he thinks he's in Half-Life. That's what Phil floats. Whereas in the chapter before that, if you were to end there would have been more closure.
Right.
So he opens that door and leaves it open. Is that the main thing that because that is, there's an open door at the end of this?
Well, no. That's
we don't know if he really can.
That he's closing the door by, like David says, he's closing out he's adding those reversals and parallels. He's completing what David says is a story. Yeah, whereas I wanted to end where this person is going on with her life, not necessarily knowing where the future is going to take her.
Oh, so you're thinking of Angel. I'm thinking more of Archer, insofar as, well, we don't know.
Archer is the subject, but he's not the.
He's not the protagonist, sure, or the narrator for that matter.
Yeah. He's not the character that we're supposed to care about.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Well, so Archer / Phil, or Angel / Phil have to, like she goes on wondering if this guy or if Archer really came back or not. So, but I like the idea that we get this version of it where at least someone thinks he
but
did.
It's a chicken shit comeback. It really is. It's not like he came back.
Right.
I mean,
I would have liked to seen, him turn into fucking Palmer Eldritch or something when he came, crawl out of someone's mouth.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you're gonna go for it, go for it.
Right.
The idea that Bill is supposed to just accept, oh, right, it's just another voice that I hear, is just ridiculous. Come on.
All right. Well, that's fine. Professor Wilson,
I think you both make valid points, actually. I think I could side with either of you. I think I'm going to side with Larry, though. I don't know.
Maybe David.
Well, I don't think you would agree with me that it's solid or coherent. I think you like it because you find it like kind of a chaos agent to the rest of the book, right?
Yes. I do enjoy chaos agents, yes.
Yes.
That's
so
a good way.
You like it for a different reason because you interpret it differently, which is fine.
Right.
Which is actually the interesting part, that we are all kind of seeing it in a little bit of a different way, which is good.
Yeah.
All right. Final judgments on Timothy Archer. I'm going to start by saying I believe I gave this book 4 out of 4 Coke cans found in the Israeli desert. 4 out of 5 Coke cans found in the Israeli desert is what I think I'm going to go with Timothy Archer. But and I think that it's overall a really good book. I can't divorce like what I know about the interesting real life character
for the 8th book in a row.
Yeah, and I don't think it's actually a lot of people that question. One thing I will say that I think is very different, and this may be because I've spent so much time studying Owl in the Daylight. And I haven't written that chapter yet. That's next, but I've done all the reading for it, and a lot of people put a lot of weight on this book for the direction that Phil was going in his career. And I think that is wrong, because I think Owl in the Daylight would have been a very different book. And I don't know what direction he would have taken the rest of his career, but he was returning to a very science fictional concept next. And a very good science fictional concept, and a very weird one. And I honestly don't know if he could have pulled it off, but I'd like to think he would have, but I don't think this one represents the direction he's going in his life.
Yeah. Okay.
So, all right, Larry.
Well, let's see. What am I giving this? Okay, so it's minus this, and then according to the Pritchard scale, it gets it's I actually had someone say something to me the other day about like the scale they use for rating books, and I thought it was ridiculous. It was just like Dead Poets Society. In the Pritchard scale, it comes to this point. Anyway, I'm going to give this 4.5 moxas. If you guys remember what a moxa is.
I don't remember.
It's an epiphany.
How did I end up giving it less stars than you, even though I said way more positive things about it, which is interesting.
Well, I'll tell you why. Is it has flaws. It's obviously flawed. I didn't like the last 35, 40 pages, whatever it was. I think the female characters are poorly written, as usual in a Phil K. Dick book. But there's effort put forth there. But this has a huge nostalgia factor for me. It brings me back to the time when I was young and I was explorative, and I was discovering all new things, new ways of looking at the world. And usually, like even says in the book, I get all these quotes and stuff from books, plays, poetry. That's how I was looking at the world back then. And this is one of the books that made me think that way. The way I think now is partly based on this book, because it affected me in a way of looking at things through a different lens than I had as a 19, 20-year-old, whatever it was. And
that's beautiful, man.
Yeah. And the story itself was interesting to me, to hear about this, Bishop's fall from grace and how it affected the people in his lives. And it could have been more soap opera-ish, I guess, but I'm glad it wasn't. I'm glad it was more meditative and contemplative, rather than just a tabloid sort of review of someone's life.
Yeah, what a dick. Pike, like, what an asshole. Like, overall. It's an interesting character study of an asshole, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And most assholes are interesting in study. So that's my review.
Professor Wilson. I give it 3 out of 5 hebephrenics. And I like it for similar reasons, that like its meditative quality. I really like that. I like above all, I think, how it's kind of, for me anyway, a thematic retrospective on PKD's canon. Loses stars, however, of course, because there's too much coherence and control, and not enough chaos and ambiguity.
Goddamn storytelling.
I know. Can't stand
that. Now, next we will discuss how we think this could be made as a film. Do we think this could be made as a film?
Come on, this is a film. I mean, it's simple.
Yeah, I do think it could make a very interesting movie in the right hands.
Mm-hmm.
And you could make it for a pretty low budget, although it would have to be period. That would be something.
Or what about like an Oliver Stone sort of, with that weird sort of editing shit that he did for a while with, Natural Born Killers and Nixon and stuff like that. Like something
that kind of
hyper edited and weird.
Well, especially go full Paranormal Activity with the seance scenes and everything.
Right? Super weird with it.
You could go either way. This I think this could work too, is like a sort of case study of the time in which it was written, mm-hmm. and like a period piece.
Yeah.
A24 could be the people for the job.
And you could still be making it now.
A movie of the week out of it. I mean, it's that broad.
Yeah.
It could be just like we'd see it on Lifetime or something.
David, did you say what did you say? I missed.
I'm just kidding. I said they could make it right now for A24. Yeah. I mean, they could hire us today. We're ready.
I actually wouldn't mind seeing the Lifetime version of this.
Oh yeah. Are you kidding? Yeah, Lifetime has.
You're just my mistress.
Yeah.
You hold all control over me.
Oh Lord!
One phone call to the Chronicle, and I'm
him praying in church with the rosary beads and everything. And
and I do highly recommend rather than wait for the movie, you can watch The In Search Of, but you'll definitely have a few moments where you'll be calling BS on it.
I'll put that in the or the link to the YouTube in the
show. And anybody should be watching In Search Of anyways, because it's just fun to hear Leonard. And by the way, Leonard Nimoy didn't believe in any of that shit. It was a paycheck, which is funny. But
he's damn good on it.
He's damn good because he had a great voice, So.
Hey, what's his what's the episode there? There was like 6 seasons of that, I know. In
It was
Hey, well, this is in the sixth season, episode 2,
episode 22.
Oh, was it 22? Okay.
And I looked at the release date, and it aired exactly. It aired in February of '82, 1 month before Phil died.
Wow.
I'm watching that tonight.
It's partially responsible for Phil's
we have
death.
The links on our
He was so outraged of how they got the story wrong that it was part of his death, right? And I'm of course kidding, but yeah. And I now that I know that all the In Search of episodes are basically on YouTube, I'm I used to, the Sci-Fi Channel replayed those in the '90s, at late at night, and I remember I used to watch this all the time.
My aunt recorded all the episodes, so when I was a kid, she would show them to me when she babysitted me. She would just show like episode after episode of Twilight Zone, or she recorded everything on VHS. So it would be like In Search of, or some shit like that.
Well, she was a better babysitter than Phil, when Phil babysat Walter Nelson and taught him how to shoot a gun.
Right. Well, I don't know if it's better, but
the things you learn when you listen to the DickHeads podcast. You can too listen to the Walter Nelson interview where he talks about Phil babysitting him. All right, Larry, do you have a Dicklike suggestion for this episode?
I actually have like a group of Dicklike suggestions, and they're solely based on this novel. So this is not about the rest of his books. This is not about Blade Runner. This is not about any of that stuff. It is based on works that I read at the time I read this book, and sort of have that same appeal as this book does. So it's basically the first 5 novels by Tom Robbins, especially Still Life with Woodpecker. The conversation that the 2 main characters have about the difference between an outlaw and a criminal is fantastic. Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, another roadside attraction. Everything in there is sort of along this vein, but much more entertaining, let's say. And then there's Carrie Fisher's pair of novels that are full autobiographical, Surrender the Pink and Postcards from the Edge. Fantastic books. Everyone should read those. I mean, she's Carrie Fisher. She's Princess Leia. How do you not read her book? She also
is one of the most notorious behind-the-scenes script doctors that
no one knows about.
No one knows about that. She fixed dialogue on scripts like all the time.
Yep.
And she would be brought in to just tweak dialogue because she got so good at it on the set. And there's supposedly there's a lot of great lines in movies that just got tweaked by Carrie Fisher, but
so read those books.
Just saw her in The Birds.
She is clever, she is witty, she is smart, and it shines through in her writing.
I forgot that she was. I love Tom Robbins, incidentally. I forgot that she wrote. I mean, she put out
I think she put out 4 or 5 different novels, but these are the 2 that I thought were the best for me.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned him last show, but Richard Bach. Everything up to 1 or the one after that, which is Still Flying or something like that. These are books about a pilot who talks about life, metaphysics, joy, pain, all that. So, religion, obviously. So those are my recommendations.
Professor Willison, do you have a Dicklike suggestion this month?
So I have one, and it has to do with that book I'm writing on PKD's biographies. This is one of the creative biographies. I'm going to show you.
Oh, wow.
You guys read this? Or you two?
Anthony read that.
Okay.
Yeah, at some point, but we didn't. I haven't read it.
Yeah. It's just called Philip K. Dick, a comics biography, graphic novel, or graphic, biography. Laurent Casey, I guess, and Mario Marchesi. I think they're Indian.
French?
From India. Oh, is it French?
Well, Laurent, is it Laurent?
Yes, it is. That's the surname. The forename is French for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, I bet maybe it is. Who knows? But it's in English, and it's pretty good.
It is really popular in France. So
is it?
We just got an email from France. So.
Oh yeah. It's not that.
Wow. They love Phil over there.
Oui, they do. So yes, that's my recommendation. Well worth the read if you enjoy comics and PKD.
I've been reading a lot of nonfiction about Phil as well, and two that I want to recommend. I think I mentioned this one last time, but I actually finished it. The Writers of the 21st Century series. So this is the book from '82, but I talked about that last time, so I'm not going to talk about it. But this one I just finished, and Professor Wilson has this one too. After Engulfment. Yep. Now, one of the reasons why I'm going to encourage this one heavily is because we are going to have Ellen Greenham on the show eventually. But
don't make fun of it, is what you're telling me. Got it.
Yeah. So after Engulfment, Cosmicism and Neo-Cosmicism in H.P. Lovecraft, Philip K. Dick, Robert Heinlein, and Frank Herbert. It's about cosmic horror, basically. And there's almost as much Phil in here as there is Lovecraft, to be honest with you. And there's a lot of Dune in here as well. There's only a little bit of Heinlein. She only really looks at 2 books. But I do love the over-the-top academic language in here is awesome. I'm going to read just one little thing. And this is talking about, do androids dream of electric sheep? The human creature's fear in facing the possibility of insignificance and biological inferiority is explored. Simply put, through the engulfing process of assimilation, the Borg adds to its collective hive. She's talking about Star Trek, by the way. And in doing so, highlight the fact that human biology alone cannot guarantee the human creature's survival against others in the universe. That's comparing the Borg and Star Trek to androids dream of electric sheep. It's very intense academic language. There are several sentences in here that just made me laugh at how over the top they were written. But there's a lot of Scanner Darkly, a lot of Three Stigmata. There's a lot of talk about the short stories, a lot of Second Variety, a lot of The Electric Ant. That short story. So it's very good stuff. And when 2/3 of us have read this book who have it, we will set up an interview with Ellen Greenham, who is an Australian lecturer who apparently also knows a lot about Russian science fiction.
Wait, she's Australian?
She's Australian. Yeah.
I might have to do that one.
Incidentally, those the artist and the author of that graphic novel, they're French. You were right, Larry. Who's the publisher of that book, David?
Hippocampus Press, who focuses mostly on Lovecraftian fiction and nonfiction.
Do they mostly publish academic stuff?
No, they publish.
Oh, no,
they're about 50-50. They do scholarship and fiction.
Okay.
So all of S.T. Joshi's scholarship on Lovecraft comes from Hippocampus, but also, for example, John Shirley's most recent fantasy novel, The Sorcerer in Atlantis, came out from Hippocampus, and his collection of Lovecraftian fiction, Lovecraft Alive, came out on Hippocampus. So they do fiction and nonfiction. So, but yeah, so that's my Dicklike suggestion. And on that note, the next book is The Broken Bubble. Do we have that pulled up to read? The
next book I have is The Man Whose Teeth Were All Exactly the Same.
All right. You want me to read a little bit about that?
Do that just in case, and then we'll close it out.
Okay, yes, just in case. The man whose teeth were all exactly alike, sometime between 1958 and 1962, Leo Runcible, a liberal Jew, is working in the real estate field. On learning what Walt D'Ambrosio, Leo's neighbor, has had a black visitor to his house in a, quote, lily white suburb of Marin County, California. Boy. Potential purchase.
It's Marin.
Oh, Marin, excuse me.
Yeah.
Potential purchasers interrogate Runcible about the matter and ultimately incur his wrath over their narrow-minded bigotry. He thereby fails to close the deal and forfeits their friendship and a precious commission as well, and so forth. Huh.
It sounds like the whole book. Like, oh, now you don't need to read it.
Yeah, Wikipedia could use some editing there. No, it seems like he's kind of laying race cards quite a bit at the with these.
Well, see, Dick was always like anti-racism, but as we know now, his anti-racism comes across as racism.
Right. Yes.
All right. On that note, let's close this puppy down.
Right.
On that note, what we always say, keep it paranoid.
Be paranoid.
Stay paranoid.
All that.
All right. On that note, we are done.